Me too? Yeah, let's do it. Let me guess, this mic's on? Is this mic on? There we go. Welcome, everybody. I have one question before we introduce our special guest. How many of you have ever been to Barstool Sports' website?
That's pretty good.
And the rest of you are lying? How many of you follow at least one of their 5 gazillion Twitter accounts and wish they would follow you back? Understood. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to welcome in the CEO of Barstool Sports, the lovely Erica Nardini. Erica, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, how did we get here? Like, not how do you get to hashtag, like,
Yeah. Not well.
This was not your thing. I don't see Barstool Sports and you connected. Like, you had to tell me the story for me to believe it. Where did you start? How did you get to this point?
I started my career in Boston. I grabbed the paper from Dave when he started it in 2004. I lived in Somerville, Massachusetts. Was always a Barstool fan. Had a ton of merch. Was like these guys like wore a ton of Barstool merch. Barstool was the way guys that I knew talked. There was their sense of humor. It was a sense of humor I grew up with. I started my career at Fidelity Investments. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I definitely didn't want to be a lawyer. I then moved to work in advertising and marketing and did that for the majority of my career. What I really fell in love with was the internet. And my first big break was when I started at Fidelity, nobody cared about the internet because there was no money in it, and all of the money was in broadcast and print, and those were very prestigious mediums to work in. And I wanted to work in the internet because it was super messy and it was undeveloped, and you could do something different every day, and there was a ton of data, and you could be very creative, and mostly people left you alone. And I liked that, and really just grew from there.
Now let's fast forward. You're the CEO of something called Barstool Sports. So for those people, the 5 people that didn't raise their hand, what's the mission statement? What is it? A media company? Is it a website company? Is it a radio station? What is Barstool Sports?
Barstool Sports is the most influential brand for men in America today, is what I would say. I think we are building a media company the way that a media company will look in the future. I think we're almost a 2-year-old company, to be honest. The brand is, 15 years old. The audience has been with us for that long. It's an incredible audience. They are our single greatest gift. But what we're building is a company the way companies will look in the future, socially distributed, constant conversation that is married with content, various forms of direct-to-consumer revenue, a brand that understands virality, and a brand that understands that laughing at something, saying something, tweeting something, and wearing something are all parts of the same thing. And that's what we do exceptionally well.
Is the target demo the same as when you took over, as it is now?
Yeah, editorially.
It's the same people?
Editorially, Barstool likes people who find Barstool funny. And we've just gotten much bigger. When I got to Barstool, there were, 12 people. They all lived in Boston, except I think there were 3 people that lived in New York, myself included. We had 3 podcasts. We had never been on anybody else's air. The guys did one video show called The Rundown, which, arguably is some of the funniest content to ever come out of Barstool. It happened on The Rundown, which they ran out of their apartments on Skype.
How many people have seen that? There we go.
And now we have 700 social accounts. We have 19 podcasts. We we create 200 pieces of content a day in radio, in video, in in blogs, and in social. And what we are today is essentially an IP company, whereby we're building brands that resonate with, audiences between 18 and 49 years of age, mostly men. We launched a Snapchat show last Monday, and it's 50-50 men and women. So yes, our audience is changing, but it's not by virtue of the edit changing. It's by virtue of the fact that we're becoming a larger brand that lives on more platforms than just our own.
I'll ask one completely selfish question.
Sure.
What's your belief in podcasts versus radio?
I love podcasts. Podcasts are very nascent. And podcast reminds me of the internet in 1999, whereby there was no double click. There was no standardization of buying. Right now, when you buy a podcast, it is an exceptionally manual exercise. The tracking of podcasts is not uniform. The distribution of podcasts is very controlled. So there's a huge runway for podcasts. The advantage that radio has is it's real time. But it's constrained into a format, and like a blog or a video or anything born out of the internet, podcasts can be whatever you want it to be. It can be 10-minute. We have podcasts that are 7 minutes long. We have podcasts that run for an hour and 90 minutes. So Pat McAfee legendarily, I think his second podcast was 2.5 hours long, and he just kept on going because he could. So
right, no one was there to tell him to break.
So, I like audio content. For us, audio content is very similar to a blog, whereby it's what someone thinks and it's the sharing of their point of view. To me, we have one shape that takes is on Sirius XM that fits within a regular radio schedule and a linear channel. The other is completely non-linear, but we make it linear by virtue of how we stitch it together.
Barstool is the only media company that has a female CEO and CRO. What has that been like?
Awesome. I think awesome. I'm biased. We hired a phenomenal CRO, a woman named Deirdre Lester, who came out of Whistle Sport. She worked for ESPN. She worked for Rivals. She worked at MLB. So she has a ton of pedigree in the sports space. We are building a very different company, and I think part of what comes with hiring people who are different, in my case being a woman, is you hire other women, and I think we've done a great job of that.
You mentioned in the Snapchat show that the audience was 50-50. Do you think that Barstool will alienate its core base if they start catering to women? Is that a fine line that you guys are walking? I
don't think they cater to women. We have a show called Chicks in the Office. Does anyone follow Chicks in the Office? So Chicks in the Office are two, I would argue, exceptionally talented women. One is named Rhea and the other is Fran. They were interns for different people, and we said, hey, we have a room downstairs. Do you want to make a show? And they said, yep, we want to make a show, but we don't really know that much about sports. Fran is an Eagles fan, which is unfortunate, but Rhea is not into sports per se. And they wanted to do a show about entertainment, but they wanted to do it with the Barstool voice and with the Barstool approach. So we made a show called Chicks in the Office because when I got to Barstool, there weren't any other women, and then there was me and those two. So whenever a girl showed up, the guys were like, Chicks in the Office. So we made it into a joke. We made it into a show. That show has a distinct audience. There's guys who love that show. Their audience is 70% male. There are girls who love that show. So we don't have an agenda, I think, is one of the biggest things you will find that is different about Barstool Sports. We like funny people who have a point of view, who have something to say, who can say it in a timely and frequent manner, and who can find audience and engage with them around that. So, I don't think there's anything overt about will the audience extend, will it not extend. We want more people to touch Barstool Sports, think Barstool Sports is funny, wear Barstool Sports.
People will always measure success from a valuation. That's not necessarily how a media company operates, and you call yourselves a media company. What are the next things? Is it more TV, more radio? Is it licensing? Is it more podcasts? What are some of the things that you're targeting that you're saying, this is something Barstool should do more?
I care about understanding our audience, and I think that what sets Barstool apart, there will never be another Barstool Sports, and I've talked about this before, because what Dave had, and Dan Katz, and Keith Markovich, and Kevin Clancy, they had 15 years of just saying whatever they wanted, and growing an audience who developed a loyalty and a relationship. And when Dave started Barstool, advertisers were not knocking at the door. Distribution partners were not coming around and saying, hey, we want to carry your content. So the only way that they could monetize was to sell t-shirts, create happy hour events, and ultimately tours. So our foundation is in direct-to-consumer revenue, and we believe that we have a responsibility to our audience, and our audience feels an affinity with Barstool, and so there's a good value exchange there. So from my vantage point, I want to create more IP that resonates with audiences we have today and audiences we want to grow. Rough and Rowdy is a great example of that. We bought a boxing promoter out of West Virginia in October last year. We do a live pay-per-view boxing event every 8 weeks in a different state, in a different city. In that boxing event, we do 30, 3 one-minute round fights, which is internet speed boxing, right? It's made for the internet. We understand the internet. We're creating an entertainment vehicle that has its own IP and its own audience that's born out of Barstool Sports. It's funny, it's sports, it's comedy, it's a little weird, and it's unexpected. And so that's a good example of, we're building into the Barstool brand and building that brand out, and then finding new brands that will sit inside and alongside our portfolio. Those could be brands that take shape of consumer products. Those are brands that could be entertainment brands. I don't think we will pursue television the way I pursued television, 2 years ago. But we will pursue more video. We will pursue being linear. We will pursue new brands.
You mentioned, the growth of sports media, and that Barstool is the type of sports media we will see in the future. What about all those traditional places? And I'm not calling out NBC or CBS or ESPN, but there's been so much talk about downsizing, and there's been so much talk about changing the way these traditional companies have done their business. Is this the model? Are you guys the pioneer? I know this isn't your interest, but what happens to those guys when the future does come?
Yeah, I think the average age of a television viewer is between 65 and 67 years old. I'm pretty sure I'm right on that. So there's 2 challenges with traditional media, whether it's sports or otherwise. One is that you are dependent on one revenue stream, which is in attrition, which is subscription, and the other revenue stream, advertising, creates incredible influence over the content that you create, and the 2 are at odds. The less people you have, the harder it is to drive advertising, et cetera. I also think that by virtue of the age of a television viewer, those brands are not in touch with what young fans or people on the internet want. And I don't think it's just about being young. I think it's about being of the internet. And so I don't know what happens to traditional companies, but they're having to, there's a difference between managing growth, which is what the challenges are of Barstool Sports. We're managing incredible growth. And then there's managing decline. And when you look at the traditional sports business, what they are managing is decline.
I always have a joke about the Christmas parties at some of these broadcast outlets that, at the end of a year at a Christmas party or a holiday party, someone would stand on the table and say, "We had a great year."
Yeah.
That must happen at Barstool Sports all the time. The growth is exponential, and you have this loyal following. My favorite are people who love Barstool that hate the Patriots. That makes me laugh.
Like an oxymoron.
But the idea that you guys have that loyalty and that connection with an audience member, how do you maintain that while the numbers grow?
So we're not very self-congratulatory. We're pretty hardworking. We're very hard on ourselves. We're very critical. The other thing that's very different about Barstool is that most everything that happens inside of this company is shared outside of this company. So that's one big difference for us with our fans, is that they're along for the ride with us. So when Dave and I go to Las Vegas and have a bunch of meetings, Dave talks about it on the radio. When Big Cat is cleaning up his corner because he's got a hoarder's mess, like, he's talking about it on Pardon My Take. So one of the things that's different about us is that the inside of this company is the outside of this company. The second piece of it is that, you know, there are, to a conversation you and I were having earlier, there are diehard fans of the blog, and they just love the blog. And then there are diehard fans of our Instagram. And then there are diehard fans of, you know, a good example is we created an account last fall called Fifth Year, which is College Never Ends. And we turned it into a Snapchat show, and it's basically viral videos of college kids doing things you can imagine college kids doing. That has its own fans who may not care about Barstool Sports, the blog, who may not care about any particular podcast, but who are loyal to one particular point of view that can only come from this company.
There has been a lot of talk from the website and from the shows about giving fans what they want. How do you gauge that? Is it reading the mentions on Twitter? I'm sure you get emails from random people pitching their great shows and their great podcasts. Yep. I'll send mine later. But the idea that you have these things, like, how do you determine what fans dig? You know,
we have an incredibly talented editorial team, and bloggers, personalities, podcasters, hosts, they understand intuitively. It's not people like me who are saying, most companies, there's someone like me telling someone in an editorial role what they should be doing.
Right. Harry White telling Jimmy Olsen.
Correct. Like, we don't do that at Barstool. Like, our guys and girls who we hire because they're phenomenally talented, because they have a strong point of view, and we think that they can thrive in our environment, which is very unstructured and very high producing. They talk to their fans constantly, and we don't have any separation between the piece of content that we create and the conversation that happens after it. So we know instantaneously if the joke hits or not. If the joke doesn't hit, we fix the joke. But if the joke hits, we'll do more. And having that type of real time, you know, one of the differences in Barstool is that the distance between an idea and execution are very, very short. We think of something and tend to produce it that day, if not in that hour. And that could be video, that could be audio, it's definitely social, and it's merchandise instantaneously. But the second piece of it is there's no distance between our fans and our personalities. There's no big corporate structure that everything runs through. We're all on the internet 24/7, responding, connecting, promoting, listening.
Do you guys make concerted effort? There are only so many hours in the day. Like, does Dave or any of those guys, do they spend an X amount of time saying, listen, I'm going to start replying, because for every person that I reply to, that is a connection that makes their day.
Sure.
And it's not to belittle those people. It's literally, but the whole idea of what is great about social media is I can reach out to my favorite podcaster and find them.
Yep.
Is that something that's conscious in the day?
It's not that calculated. It's very organic. You know, I had a kid come in yesterday to interview, and I was like, how'd you get here? Like, why are you here? And he said, my dad was really sick, and you guys shouted out. You gave me and my dad a shout out on the rundown 5 years ago. And I've been loyal to this brand ever since.
And it took 2 seconds to do.
2 seconds. It wasn't calculated. We weren't like, oh, hey, we should, you know, that was before my time where it happened. But, you know, last night I got a DM from a guy in Chicago. One of our guys, Henry Lockwood, who goes by Hank, he's the producer of Pardon My Take, created this thing called the car stick, which is when you drop like your phone down the side of it. It's a pain in the ass. It sucks, and you can't get it, and you're reaching down to get it. So he created this invention called the car stick, which the car stick is just a mini hockey stick, but it just scoops out whatever is falling between the seats.
With a Barstool logo.
Yeah, of course, naturally. Yeah. So we produced the car stick. We sold the car stick. We sold them out in an hour. And a fan DM'd me yesterday and was like, hey, I got my girlfriend, who's a huge Pardon My Take fan. I sent these guys a big silver package. I'm just hoping that they can sign the car stick, and I put a self-addressed envelope on it, and I'd love for you to mail it back. And I'm like, these guys sit in a pig pen, so it's a mess. So this morning I came to work, and I'm like, hey, here's the silver package. Here's the So it's very fluid, and it's very open, and it's, when Dave started it, he was like the Pied Piper, and he would say to fans in Boston, to guys and girls in Boston, like, if you don't show up at the Harp tonight, Barstool Sports is going to go out of business. And people showed up, and he hung out with people at the Harp on a Thursday night in Boston, Massachusetts in 2006. Like, it's not that different now. It's much bigger now. There's more people, there's more personalities. We're stretching, but at the core of it, I'm going to respond to the guy who sent the self-addressed silver envelope because he wants to get it signed for his girlfriend. So that's different. That's just different in how we do what we do.
Erica Nardini, ladies and gentlemen.
Cool. Thank you. That was so fast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right.
Thanks so much.